There is a reason why MSTR is an inevitability when it comes to being added to portfolios, added to indexes, et cetera, et cetera. One of those reasons is how it impacts returns overall on a portfolio. Now, this video is probably going to be useful to you, not if you're 100% Bitcoin maxi cold storage, da 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 da. That's one way of looking at it, and that's absolutely fine, of course. But this is going to help you really if you're looking, adding some Bitcoin allocation, looking at, okay, how do I think about my Bitcoin portfolio? And, what are the impacts of adding something like MSTR to my portfolio in a reasonable way? There's one thing that I was saying in a few videos, and that is that MSTR will be a part of the Magnificent 7, aka making it a Magnificent 8. And today, Saylor also agrees with me. He's put it out there saying, MSTR is part of the creating the Magnificent 8. So here's the reason why it will do that and why it's an inevitability. So I'm looking at a portfolio here from the year 2020 until 2024. And I think that's a pretty good time period. It's been an interesting, testy time period, and I think it's quite fascinating to look at what's happened in between there. The benchmark I'm looking at is the QQQ, so the NASDAQ, right? And during that period, if you put $100,000 into QQQ at the beginning of 2020, by now it would be worth $236,000. That's a pretty good return. It's an annualized CAGR of 19.85%, right? And that's pretty good for the average person. I mean, you're outperforming the amount of monetary devaluation that's going on, and overall, it's a pretty damn good return. I don't think anyone would be mad if they had $100,000 turn into $240,000 in a 4-year window, right? I don't think that would be much of an issue. But here comes the power of having a Bitcoin equity like MicroStrategy, with a focused plan and a leveraged approach to your portfolio. If we zoom this down into the most famous portfolio over that 4 years, that's been the Magnificent 7, right? It's all the major tech companies that are driving the majority of the returns that are happening across the NASDAQ. If you take those seven companies, then that $100,000 will have grown to $635,000 over that same time period. It's pretty damn good, right? That's a CAGR of 47.6% over that time period, which is quite good, right? It's quite a really, there's a reason why it's been called the Magnificent 7, and it's a great return over that time period. Now, if you're sitting there going, okay, well, you've got the Mag 7, you've got all of that. What happens if you add a little bit of Bitcoin to that, right? I'm not saying a lot, and this is why I said, one of the reasons for me doing this channel is not just for the Bitcoin maxi 100% Bitcoin da 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 da. It's really for people who have other assets. It's really for people like my parents who have a property portfolio and are thinking about, okay, how do we diversify this into a little bit of Bitcoin? What sort of allocation do we need, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why I think everyone should subscribe, because these are the types of rational conversations that I think are important, in addition to the irrational bullish conversations too, because I think these are the types of conversations that help people decide, okay, if I have a retirement account and I can't really afford the volatility that Bitcoin brings, what else can I do with it? How should I think about having Bitcoin equities, et cetera, et cetera. So if you haven't subscribed already or followed, please do that now. Now, if we add in, so we're looking at it, the QQQ grows $100,000 to $236,000, right, over a 4-year window. The Mag 7 grows $100,000 to $635,000 over that same time period. Unbelievably phenomenal returns. Now, what happens if you add Bitcoin in the form of MSTR into that portfolio? What happens? Well, the $100,000 grows to $750,000 over the same time period if you add a leveraged Bitcoin equity like MSTR. And bear in mind, there's been 3 years in that period, or 2.5 years in that period, which has been a bear market. Just imagine that, right? We're going through a 2.5-year bear market, and it still generates above $100,000 plus of returns over the Mag 7, which is why I've been saying that Bitcoin will, in the form of MSTR, become part of a Mag 8. And I think this Mag 8 will outperform anything that the standard tech companies can do. It's another reason why the bill, the voting from Microsoft about adding Bitcoin to the balance sheet shouldn't be surprising to anyone, because these returns are unbelievably phenomenal, right? And by the way, for that extra return, they've managed to the worst year was down 49.58%, and the Mag 7 was down 46.1%. Right? The maximum drawdown to add another $100,000 plus of returns, the maximum drawdown on the Mag 7 portfolio was 47.26%, and the maximum drawdown on the Mag 8 would have been 52.32%. So there's not much difference here. In fact, the Sharpe ratio of the Mag 7 is 1.23, and the Sharpe ratio of the Mag 8 is 1.22. Right? This is a phenomenal addition to the portfolio. And if you're thinking about it, going from a, roughly, 14% something allocation to each one of those Mag 7s to a 12 point something percent allocation, just adding MicroStrategy into there. If you have a portfolio, it's worth thinking about what would happen if you took 10 to 20% of that portfolio and diversified that into MicroStrategy and just left it alone, right? What would happen in that scenario? Because this is a huge return generator, and I think it's an absolute inevitability that it starts getting added to portfolios because of the fact that it boosts returns like this, right? You're talking about having a NASDAQ return from 100,000 to 236,000, or 19.85% CAGR, to a Mag 8 CAGR of 100,000 growing to $750,000 over a 4-year window, with an annualized CAGR of 52.79%. That is unbelievable, right? And all you're doing is adding in, an even allocation with an even annual rebalance to MicroStrategy. And by the way, again, it's important to remember, 2.5 years of these measurements, we're in a bear market for MicroStrategy. So that's how powerful of rocket fuel it is to add a position of MicroStrategy into a balanced portfolio, which is why I've been saying that having MicroStrategy in a long-term hold balanced portfolio is going to be a good idea, is going to be a inevitability as far as I'm concerned. And it's why I think the big hedge funds managers and things like that will start they will start having MicroStrategy desks to understand what's going on here with this stock and what they're managing to do in terms of creating this oil refinery of taking inefficient capital, turning it into fast, efficient Bitcoin, and then providing a platform of speculation that you can do for Bitcoin, right? Because like I said in my previous video, if you haven't seen it, about how I'll plan the next bear market, there's 100% chance that I will go and buy some form of put options on MicroStrategy with a 1.5 times leverage, because that's what the stock has, right? It's not like me going and putting in leverage. At some point in the market, I will take some of my profits and I will go buy MicroStrategy puts. And that means that MicroStrategy has now become a platform for me to speculate and protect and hedge my Bitcoin profits. That is the value of MicroStrategy, and no other company's ever done this, right? The only time that we've ever seen anything like this is an ETF, where you have a proxy to the underlying asset. But now you have a platform of speculation on an underlying asset that has a tremendous volatility, and on top of that, it's a leverage product, it's a leverage instrument. So this is the first time this has ever happened in the history of markets to this scale and this level and this professionalized way. And I think it should not be something that you ignore. So I think you should definitely understand the idea of the Magnificent Eight. If you've got a balanced portfolio that you're thinking about to grow, take it, consider adding in a certain percentage of that into MicroStrategy just for the long-term hold. And I think MicroStrategy will continue to garner premium based on the fact that it is becoming a unique equity in modern history, right? Simply having a platform, a leveraged platform to speculate on a highly volatile underlying asset is phenomenal, right? That's really the value, that's the product of MicroStrategy that it is becoming to the equity markets. And Remember, ultimately, I'm not saying you should put 100% of your net worth in MicroStrategy. That's not what I'm saying. I think you should have a sizable amount in just underlying Bitcoin positions. But if you can add a little bit, right? In this Mag 8 portfolio, it's like 12 point something percent that you're adding, and it's creating over $100,000 more in returns over that same 4-year window compared to the single best performing portfolio in terms of the Mag 7 that we've ever seen in history, right? You add 12.5% in MicroStrategy and it blows it out of the water. So I think this is an inevitability. I think it's something that everyone should look at. And I think if you're not looking at this and not looking at MicroStrategy in terms of a balanced Bitcoin portfolio, I think you're going to harm your chances of a return. And again, I want to focus on these types of conversations because these are the rational conversations that are important to have for normal people with portfolios, with retirement funds, et cetera, and think about, okay, how do we create some Bitcoin leverage returns within those portfolios by adding in a little bit of MicroStrategy, et cetera, et cetera. So the Magnificent 8 is coming. It's in fact here. Now that Michael Saylor's put it out there, it's even more here than when I put it out there. So this is absolutely fantastic. And I think that this will be the best performing portfolio if from a balance perspective, right? Of course, if you have an acute allocation to Bitcoin, that's going to outperform everything. But from a balanced portfolio perspective, I think the Mag 8 is going to continue to outperform over the next decade, 2 decades, et cetera, and it's something that you should highly consider. But ultimately, there is always only 3 rules to Bitcoin. Step number 1, you buy Bitcoin. Step number 2, shut the fuck up. And step number 3, you get fabulously wealthy.